Welcome to the RecoverU podcast. I'm Kylene.
And I'm Patrick.
We are a couple in recovery
from sex addiction
and betrayal trauma. Together, we share our story to encourage you on your journey. It's here that we talk about sex addiction, betrayal trauma, mental, emotional, and physical health, faith, and anything and everything needed to recover you to your most authentic self that God created you to be. Hello, 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 hello. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Happy Sunday.
Yes. Happy Sunday.
Or Wednesday to everybody else if you're listening to this the day it comes out. Today, we are going to talk about the path to reconciliation. And this is going to really be focused a lot on the addict in recovery and that process. But the reason we're terming it the path to reconciliation is because we also want to make sure that we're answering the question, what if he's not an addict, right? But you've had infidelity or an affair or whatever happened in the relationship that destroyed trust. And so we're going to talk about the process that you hear us talk about all the time, why we recommend that across the board if infidelity is present, if you choose to reconcile. We're going to kind of go into that. Mm-hmm. So I'm excited. This has sort of been on my mind. I did a post in the RecoverU Facebook group, and I made a TikTok video. I didn't make a TikTok video about it, but I made the video in the RecoverU group, and it came up because someone asked me this question recently, which was, I went through this process of saying, hey, based on what you've told me, this is what I would recommend. And this is what I would recommend, the type of therapist that I would recommend that your husband see and the type of process that you guys go through. And there was some concern about having the conversation with her spouse about it being an addiction. And so then I was like, hey, you don't have to couch it that way. But I think there's a little bit of when people hear us say, hey, the first step for the guy is to go to a CSAT, which is certified sex addiction therapist. They're like, that's scary, right? But also, what if he's not an addict? Do you still recommend the same thing? And the answer is absolutely yes. And we're going to talk about all of the reasons that we think it's so important today. Mm-hmm. First, I do want to clarify too that sex therapy and sex addiction therapy are two totally different things. So if you are Googling it or looking it up, you do want to look for CSAT. You don't want to be, it's a completely different, like sex therapy is like how to have better sex and like connect to your body and connect to your partner. Sex addiction therapy is trauma recovery and stuff like that. So very, very different if you are looking for a provider. So let's just start with this question of addiction versus not addiction. In my mind, it does not matter. And this is what I tell all of my betrayal clients and anyone that asks me this question. Whether you have found pornography once on the computer, whether they had an emotional affair, whether they had a physical affair, whether you think or feel or have a hunch that it's a one-time thing or not, we still recommend that they start the process with a CSAT. And the reason for that is because number one, I think, if there is addiction underlying it and you're unaware of it, you will find that out through this process. Mm-hmm. So I think that's actually, let's start there because I think that's a huge important thing, because one of the things I do see a lot is, and I get this, like you and I had this really long relationship and I was like so shocked. Had I not pulled the thread as hard as I did, I think there could have been a scenario where I found something and you convinced me that it was a one-time thing. And then I think there could have been a scenario, right? Like in my first marriage, like I found something, we had a conversation, I never pursued it, right? I think that happens a lot. Yeah. And so partially, I think because the church doesn't talk about it. Mm-hmm. I think partially because the world, society doesn't talk about it. Your friends don't talk about it with you, right? Like things that they've gone through. And so we have this like sort of worldview that porn is everywhere and everybody looks at it to some extent, but there's no way that my husband's an addict. Right. Yeah. So I think, when we started, we didn't even necessarily know or think that you were. Yeah. Well,
I think I thought something was wrong with me, but I wouldn't have been able to term it what I ended up being, which was an addict. So I remember going into therapy relatively quickly, and he had me take a couple of assessments, sexual addiction screening test, and a couple of other different things that kind of walked me through, where I was, what I had done, and things like that. And some of those were really lengthy. If I recall, they were super lengthy. But it was nice because then you could, clinically, you could determine where you were. And so, a lot of things are easier when you start to put a name to it, and you kind of go, oh, okay, all right, well, this is, how do you fix what is wrong with me versus how do you fix an addict, right? There's two different ways to approach that.
Understand the fear, right, around like sometimes labels really scare people. And I think a lot of that has to do with this belief in society that addiction equals disease, which equals something that I can never get rid of. So accepting that as a label can be really scary because it comes with this sort of internalized belief that, but there's nothing I can do about it, or I can maybe try all these things, but I'm going to be stuck frustrated with this the rest of my life, right? So we've done a lot of talking about that. We don't believe that. We take the trauma model approach, which is the important thing with the trauma model approach is actually to label it, because then you get the help that you need. Right. And so if you say, I am an addict, then we can do all of these things to help you deal with the emotions that led into it and all this kind of stuff. And then you don't have to deal with it the rest of your life. And you can actually say, I'm a recovered addict. You don't have to say, I am an addict. And we talk about identity. I believe it's in episode 7 where we're talking a lot about identity. And we don't really like the whole, I am an addict, saying that for the rest of your life if you're not acting out, because we don't want to tell your subconscious that that's who you are. Right. But at the time that you're discovered and you're struggling with it, it is who you are and it is what you've struggled with. And so acknowledging that is the first step, I think, to getting it into the light and getting the help you need. And so number one, going to a CSAT is going to give you that information. It's going to give the addict that information. It's going to give the partner that information that they definitely are a sex addict in some way, on the spectrum in some way, or they're not. So you're going to get that information. That's going to be important because it does absolutely shift how you view it. Now, some people might like this perspective and some people might not. I don't know, but this is how I think about it is when you have something like this happening, you found your husband looking at porn, you found him having an emotional affair, you found him texting bots, whatever, messaging, models on Instagram, whatever it is. You kind of have two ways to look at it. Either there's the potential that he's an addict and he can get help and wants to recover and fix it and never be an addict again. Or he's a jerk who's he's consciously choosing to cheat on you and hurt you and do things that cause you pain. So those are different perspectives, you know what I mean? And like I said, maybe not everybody views it that way, but that's certainly how I view it. And when there is an addiction, it doesn't take responsibility away. We've talked about that. I think there is a choice aspect, but there is the compulsion aspect to it that allows us to have compassion and empathy as well. Not just this, not just anger and all this kind of stuff. When it's, again, I think when you view it through the trauma lens, the idea of saying, yes, it's an addiction, the stigma comes off of it because then you go, oh, I can actually get help for this and I don't have to struggle with it forever.
Well, and what's interesting, whether whether you did it intentionally and you're not an addict and you just, whatever, there's intentionality to all of it. But, the process is we're going to talk about this, but the process is essentially the same. You go through a process, you become open and honest, you work through, you allow the other spouse to get all the information, which allows that spouse to be informed, which, anytime you're going into a relationship, it's like reading the fine print. Now you have the fine print on your spouse, right? And as to what all of that is. And that's what you want. You want to be able to have that. So the processes are not drastically different for whatever the whatever the label is on the acting out partner.
Yeah. So well, that's another piece to it is whether you're an addict or not. I always encourage the same process, which we'll outline in like 5 seconds. But the same process, because what I see over and over and over is the same beliefs, the same pathways, the same emotions play into why they acted out in the first place, whether it is labeled an addiction or not. To me, in my mind, it doesn't matter. This is the most comprehensive, effective way to deal with it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of other reasons that we're going to talk about in a minute. But the path, when we say the process, the path to reconciliation, what is that? Okay. Just bullet points. You've heard us say this probably a lot if you've listened to any of the other episodes. Bullet points is they see a CSAT, the person that's done the betraying or the acting out. They begin working on a full therapeutic disclosure for you. You choose together whether you want to do a polygraph, and there's an impact and empathy letter. Now, if you want more on any of those individual bullet points of the path to reconciliation and the path to recovery, we have full episodes on every single one of those points. So if you go back to season 1, we share our personal journey. And then as you continue listening, we kind of break down all of these different points. But the reason this path, CSAT, disclosure, polygraph, impact, and empathy letter, the reason whether or not someone is an addict or, a one-time cheater or pornography user or whatever, if betrayal has happened, it's really, this process is what I keep coming back to and keep referring people to, because it's not just about the person who's done the betraying. It's also about the betrayed partner getting answers in a healthy way. And I think that the structure of this, as I've kind of gone through this, as I've talked to women for the past several years, as I've worked with clients one-on-one, all of these different, and we hear a lot of different stories of, success or struggles or whatever. What I see over and over and over and over and over again is when people skip a step, or they think they don't need this step, or they just weren't aware, like nobody talked about this. So they tried really, really hard to do other things, like go to marriage counseling or, all this kind of stuff. And a full therapeutic disclosure was never had, and a polygraph was never done, and the impact letter was never written, and all this kind of stuff. What I see when this process isn't followed is a lot of people that are stuck. They're so stuck. And there's a reason for that, because it answers basically all of the foundational questions for the betrayed partner in order to feel really aligned and confident in making a decision. And I think it also is, if he is an actual addict, I think it's also the most effective way to help him recover.
Yeah. Because one of the major parts of being an addict is to live in denial. And so when you go through this process, you cannot live in denial. And that process won't go well if you're in denial. So you may fail a polygraph. You may, you may not do a good job on the disclosure. So you need to, going through this process is one of the major parts of breaking that denial structure, which has led you to be an addict. One of the things that has kept you in addiction for a long time.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because I hear a lot of denial when I talk to betrayed partners. I will hear that the husband, a lot of times, or the betrayer, is not always willing to jump into the deep end of taking responsibility for what has been found, unless you pull that thread, or unless you start putting his feet to the fire, or unless you start setting really strong boundaries. And then he's like, oh, wait, like, there's actually some consequences for this. There's actually some change in my life because of this. She's not going to, like, I don't get to have my cake and eat it too kind of deal, right? Like, my life is actually changing when she found this out. And so what I see a lot is that they struggle because they get frustrated, right? Because he is somewhat in denial. He's not taking responsibility, and he can't communicate or won't communicate in an empathetic way. And part of that, I'm sure, is because there's a fear to, well, if I verbalize, and I think maybe you've talked about this too, so tell me if this resonates, but there's a fear to, like, if I take full responsibility for everything I've done and actually lay it all on the table all at once, like, I'll lose everything.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And it also, I've never personally acknowledged that in its totality. And so it's really scary.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's this secret you're taking to your grave. That's your intent. And you're going to be like, well, yeah, I just won't, once I fix it, I won't ever have to talk about it. Now you're being forced to talk about it, but it's the destination is to reconcile. And so that's the only true way to reconcile is you've got to get everything out there.
Say that again. You said that's the only way.
The only true way to reconcile is you got to get everything out there.
Yeah. I'm going to say it again. That's the only way to reconcile is to get everything out there. So I saw a video the other day, and this woman talked about trust, and she just said it very simply. Trust is built on truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So when I hear all of because I hear like stories across the spectrum about, how people are feeling and partners taking responsibility or not taking responsibility, all this kind of stuff. But what I constantly hear all the time from so many people is like, how in the world am I going to trust again? Mm-hmm. How in the world am I going to trust again? And well, I think I have all the truth. I think I know, right. But how will I ever know? Right. And I'm like, that's why we have this process. Now, is it totally infallible? No. If somebody wants to act out and keep acting out, will they? Yes. Is there anything that you can do as the partner to control them or make them want to reconcile and no. But when you have two people that want to heal, that are engaged in this process and they're doing it sincerely, these are the steps that I've seen work over and over and over and over and over again because it answers that question. Right. When you go through disclosure prep for the addict working with his CSAT, they work through a good CSAT is going to help them get out of denial. It's going to help them get to the place where they are willing and ready to take responsibility and communicate with empathy and, share everything. And a good CSAT is going to do their best to get all of the information communicated to you at once. So it's a one-time deal. Because that's another thing, like, we hear so many different stories about trickle disclosures. I mean, we had our own version of that even while we were moving towards disclosure. But what I feel like is so much worse even than that, because we at least were like moving in that direction and I'd ask questions and, whatever. But what's worse, I think, than that is not having the disclosure coming, thinking you have all the information. So you force yourself to trust, even though your brain and your nervous system are like, I don't know, right? But maybe your church has told you need to forgive. Maybe your husband has just absolutely told you, like, this is it, this is it, this is it, this is it, right? And I've heard that like happen before where they like promise there was no information. They start going through this process. Guess what? There's more information, right? And so what I think is worse than like a little bit of trickle disclosure leading to actual therapeutic disclosure is when you are forced or you force yourself to trust before you're ready and you don't have any sort of guided process. And then 5 years later, you find out more, or you find out that he was lying, or you find out that he's never stopped the behavior, and it's so much worse.
Yeah, right.
Right. And there's so many variations on a theme there with like, I found out 2 decades ago, I thought it was nothing. We lived our life. Now I've spent 2 decades with someone that I found out it wasn't just
it never stopped.
It wasn't just nonstop. It progressed, and now we're in this state of like, oh my gosh, what where are we?
Well, what's interesting too, and I often think about this, as painful as the process is, and as scary as it is for both partners, couples that stay committed to, well, committed is kind of an interesting word in this context, but couples that are interested in each other do hard things for each other, right? And I do believe that there is a recognition in interested couples to move forward with reconciliation that the betrayer recognizes how hard it is to sit in that chair and hear it. And then the betrayed spouse also sits in that chair and recognizes how hard it is to say it. And so that is a cornerstone of that healing process, because once again, couples that seem to make it do hard things for each other, right? They take sacrifices, and you can always take that approach, like, well, you owe it to me to tell me all about this, you SOB, you know what I mean, and stuff like that. But it doesn't mean that it's not hard. It's not hard to sit there. These are, in a lot of cases, I was wounded. These are incredibly wounded individuals doing this. Should they have the consequence? 100%. but they are wounded individuals, and they're sitting there taking this step. They, they go to a polygraph place willingly. They don't have to go, and it's not fun. And you sit there and you get this stuff put on you, and you get asked these crazy questions, things that you never thought you'd be doing, right? And so, and then, through that process, the addicted spouse recognizes that the spouse who's been asking all the questions and crying at night, not being able to sleep, recognizes how hard that process has been. And so there's just so much that, it really is a crucible for the relationship, individually and for the relationship. And then, so if you can get through this process, which is magical for healing.
Hard, but magical.
Yeah, hard, but magical for healing. You start to appreciate the efforts. Now, maybe you don't appreciate it day 1, week 1, week 2, month 1, but then you start to, that coupled with continued healing, starts to go, you know what? My husband didn't refuse to take a polygraph. He actually went and did it. My husband didn't say, I'm not going to talk about that. He actually talked about it. And he was willing to accept whatever consequences was coming his way. You start to go through these things in your head, and it really starts to go, well, that's what I always wanted out of my husband. Or that's what honesty. Honesty and the willingness to be seen and all of those things, which is so scary for everybody. To be seen that way.
Absolutely. And I think, it's being human, right?
Yeah.
Scary to be human, I think, sometimes.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's a responsibility for both people. If you're leaving reconciliation on the table, or you are trying to navigate life in a way that is healthy and isn't going to end up with like anger or bitterness, then this is the process to do that. And the reason, like, why is this so beneficial? I think it like what we're talking about, all the things that you just mentioned, why is it so beneficial is because it's a process that when the people are participating in it, it rips off the Band-Aid, which there's hair that comes with that. There's a scab that's ripped off. Like, it hurts. There's no doubt about that. It rips the Band-Aid off, but then what's underneath that is truth. And I guess, one of the things to ask yourself is like, do I want to continue in a relationship where I don't actually know who this person is? Do I want to continue in a relationship where I don't have the truth? And so for on the betrayed partner side, as your husband or as the betrayer starts going through the disclosure process, that provider, that CSAT, asks them a lot of questions to provide a very clear, detailed history and understanding and picture for you so you know who this person is. But also, as the betrayed partner, it's important that you take this seriously. And I would always recommend that you work with someone, and I'm happy to be that person if that's helpful. But always recommend that you work with someone, because this is an opportunity for you as well to think through, like, what are the questions that I have? What are the long-term non-negotiables? What are the things that if I find out in 5 years that I'd rather know now? Like, what are those? What are the things that if I find out in 5 years, I'm like, I just wasted 5 years? So what are the things, and so we talk through that, and we figure out, like, what are your non-negotiables? What are the things that, like, are just really ruminating in your mind? What can you not let go of? What are the things that, like, you need to know? And sometimes it goes both ends of the spectrum with this, right? So sometimes people think, well, I think I know everything, so, like, I don't really have any questions. And for me personally, what I discovered through this process was how naive I was. And so I would gently, very empathetically, very compassionately encourage you, if you're one of those betrayed partners that goes, well, he said he was looking at porn, that's all I need to know. I would highly, highly, gently, compassionately, with a huge hug and love, say, don't do that. Ask a million questions. Because the worst thing that can happen is that the answer is no, he didn't do any of these other things. But if the only thing you know is something he voluntarily gave you, I almost guarantee you there is about 1,000 things that happen that you have no idea about.
Yeah.
And so again, what we're looking for is actual truth. What we're looking for is actual vulnerability. What we're looking for is actual recovery. And I don't really think it's fair for either partner. Like, I don't think when the betrayed partner doesn't know the full truth, I certainly don't think on any level it's okay for her, because at some point, usually several years down the road, what happens is it does come up again. And so if there's anything that's like bypassed or, overridden, or a question that's not asked, like if you're not going through a full therapeutic disclosure or you're not doing a polygraph, somewhere, and sometimes it's 2 years, sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's a long time down the road, but it comes back. And so what we're trying to do is like root it out at the weed. So you're not building this whole relationship on sand, that you're actually like doing the hard work to build the foundation,
Yeah.
But I don't really think it's fair for the betrayed partner either, or the betrayer, because if he's willing to do this, sometimes it's important for them to be able to tell you. Now, we're not talking in graphic detail.
That's right. Yeah.
Right? But if he knows that you only know 1/10 of what happened, how is he ever going to feel fully seen and loved in this relationship and fully forgiven when you don't actually have the truth?
Well, and this, secrets metastasize. And so
it's not healthy for them to keep it in either.
You all could go through something really, really beautiful and healthy, but it's only 98% of the healing, and the bacteria is still in there, right? It's one of those kinds of things. And just the other thing too, when you ask questions, and I was certainly the case, I didn't fully remember everything, but a lot of it came out as you investigated and as you asked questions. And so,
and as you went through the disclosure process, you were remembering.
Yeah, absolutely. And so like, once again, you want to break that denial structure. And so I remember when I was, on both sides. Yeah. And when I was, I would be hit, and it would be very heavy, and it was very depressing for me to understand the magnitude and scope and length of time that these behaviors had been part of my life. And it was just really, really, and I still feel that way. I was like, man, I wish somebody had helped me out at age 18. You know what I mean? It would have saved a lot of pain and a lot of, and all these different things. Didn't happen. But, I think about, like, man, that was, close to 50 years, you could argue. I didn't start when I was 1, obviously, but maybe
it's like 30. 30 years.
Yeah, right. Of just
on and off.
Of just, and so you put that away because you're ashamed of it. So you put it away, and you don't want to talk about it, and you don't want to, you don't want to acknowledge it. But when you acknowledge it, then you can actually say, okay, it's time to, it's time to get a fix on that. So it's hard. I acknowledge that it's very hard, and it's not an easy thing to step into, but that kind of,
I think when if we could summarize like the message through RecoverU that I think we try to communicate over and over is, one, it's hard, but the bigger piece to that is that it's worth it. And I think that's what we keep trying to communicate in a variety of different ways, is that we understand that getting the email history is painful. We understand that labeling it addiction, if it truly is an addiction, is scary. We understand that getting a polygraph is like terrifying. We understand all of these things. But the reason this process exists, I've been really impressed over time. Because at first it was just, we were told to do it, and so we did it because we were willing to do whatever. At the point that someone told us this will help you, we were like, okay, right? But the more that I've worked with individuals, and the more I've seen this sort of play out, the more I realize like how well done this step-by-step process is when it's done with compassion and with practitioners that really care and are thorough and really believe in recovery. Because what I end up, people will say, well, I have this question, or I still feel insecure about this, or we tried this and this didn't work, and we feel stuck. And this can be years, years later, right? Like not that we haven't tried to heal, not that we haven't tried to forgive, but there's just like this rock in my shoe that will not go away about this, and I it's causing me active pain. And then when I'm talking to people, I'm going, actually like having a disclosure, a well done disclosure would answer all of those questions for you. Or maybe they feel like they have all the information. I go, how do you feel about a polygraph? Because then that just calms your nervous system and allows you to move forward saying, I can trust this person. Like, he did tell me the truth. I do have all the information. Right. And if he fails the polygraph, then you go, maybe we should go back and do a full disclosure, right? So it's all information gathering. And we've talked about the impact empathy letter as well, but again, that's part of the path to reconciliation, is being able to communicate clearly your feelings, the impact of this. And, that's another thing I see a lot with betrayed partners is just this desire deeply to help the addict, sometimes to the point of, I don't want to say enabling, but protecting. I think I would say that. Sometimes to the point of protecting them from the consequences of their behavior. And that I always think is like dangerous. Like we all have to learn that like lying is wrong. We all have to learn that touching the stove is going to burn your hand. We all, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so the more I talk to people and see the recurring pain, the recurring issues, the recurring questions, I realize how well done the process is, because when you go through it, 99.9% of that is dealt with and answered. And then it's about dealing with any of the limiting beliefs or the fears that you have internally, personally, to continue your self-growth journey, your self-worth journey, your confidence, your empowerment, all that kind of stuff. And then on top of that, how do we reconnect as a couple? And then things start rolling. I mean, just rolling. And you're like, wow, like this is so much different. And you do see that too. If people didn't know about this process and then they start this process, even if it's years down the road, just the level of healing, even though they've spent so much time and energy reading books and going to different versions of therapy and all this kind of stuff, they start doing things like a full therapeutic disclosure and a polygraph, and all of a sudden things start changing. Yeah. So I think what we're trying to communicate in like 1,000 different ways with all the episodes that we do is the pain is there, but we encourage you to be brave enough to face it, because that, like when you feel truly seen for who you are and like exposed totally, but still loved, that's like a rebirth.
It is a rebirth. Yeah.
Speaking of, this is a good segue, I think, to say that last Sunday, Patrick had the opportunity to share his story inside our personal church, which has never happened before. I mean, we did it privately inside of the council group, but never publicly in the middle of a service. That was a huge deal.
Yeah. It was pretty amazing. And I, I've had opportunities to tell my story in like men's groups and retreats and things like that. But this is a unique opportunity that came up that I couldn't say no to. And so it was a great opportunity. I spent probably, I don't know, about 8 minutes or so talking through, my testimony and how it impacted me, and then how the Conquer, series helped me out, and how therapy did, and you helped me out, and all those things. So it was really powerful, and you got a lot of great feedback. And the nice thing is it's given me something a little bit more exportable that I can share with other people. And I've done that so far.
You mean because it's the service is recorded, and so we'll share the link and be like, hey, listen, because what you shared was very clearly and very intentionally a story of transformation.
Right.
And at the end, you were like, let me actually share how going through this process ended up with all these positive things. Right. So maybe just kind of even share. I mean, to me, the fact that you did this in front of church is one of those positive things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Huge.
Absolutely, yeah.
Huge. I don't know. We can maybe like delete this if you don't feel like it's appropriate to share, but also like a friend just reached out to you about a potentially like amazing opportunity.
Yeah. He actually is affiliated with a college, and so it could be a good opportunity to get a program like this going for some of the men at that college.
Yeah.
And so
it's like amazing.
Yeah. It's huge. And so, but yeah, some of the benefits that come from healing is, I'm running groups, and there's been, I think I counted it up, it's been over 25 men that have come through the program, done really well, and kind of moved on into different levels of healing and running their own groups and all these. So that's fantastic. We have this podcast, which never would have happened. You have a coaching practice, and you're helping women through this process. We actually, the nonprofit is out there, that's one of them as well. I think our relational health has
totally different.
It's really interesting, and it like I was convinced for a number of months and years that like, okay, well, we're just going through the motions until it ends, right? You know what I mean? At some point you're going to go too hard, I'm out. And that's not at all what happened. And so like, it's a really nice beautiful relationship. You know what I mean? There's something about, once again, there's something about you knowing everything about me, yet still loving me is and wanting to be with me, which is kind of crazy. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's counter to what we are led to believe.
Right. Well, the truth, I'm thinking spiritually right now. I'm thinking, God is truth and God is light. And that is the most pure, holy, admirable thing that we all want to strive towards. Right. And what does evil do? It takes things that look like truth, or it takes something that are so close to the truth, but it's not. And it's twisted and it causes death.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is what the reason I get so we have to talk about this on the podcast. I have to make a video about this on TikTok or whatever, is because it just breaks my heart to see how many people are walking with the rocks in their shoes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thinking, well, this is all there is in life and I'm just going to have to be okay with it. Right? This is cool. This is fine. It's not fine. Right. There's more for you out there. There's more for you in your relationship. It might not be that you're happier tomorrow doing this process.
That's right. Yeah.
But you will 100%, whether you stay together or get divorced through this process, if you do it and gather the information, you're able to live with truth.
Yeah, you will become a more fulfilled human being.
Yeah, you're able to live with integrity. And then 3 years down the road, whatever decision you make, you're going to be happier than living with the rock in your shoe. And so when I see it's hard when you're going through it, but when you zoom out and say, well, my situation, if it was my best friend, when you zoom out and you look at somebody else, and it just is so heartbreaking to see that. And so then I see all these patterns and everything, and I'm like, go through the process, set the boundaries, hold the high standard. It's available to you. It's really okay to have those high standards. And so, so another sign of healing was I went to lunch with a neighbor the other day, and she was asking me about what I do. And I was super, super honest about it. The invariable, every single time the follow-up question is always, oh, interesting. How did you get into that?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you.
Yeah. And so then I always have to go, well, that's our story, and that's what happened to me. And but to me, the thing that was super, super healing about that was my nervous system did not react to me telling her that at all, which might be people are like, well, you have a podcast, you talk about this. But yes. And it's still sometimes when it's people that are going to be in your life or, and they're finding out about it, you're like, okay, how are they going to respond to this, And so I absolutely no nervous system reaction sharing with her. And so that was really, again, it was just a little mile marker. I was like, oh, that's really cool. I've done so much healing in this area that telling someone didn't even stress me out.
Yeah. Yeah. I was actually, I think the thing that's hit me over the last couple of weeks since I came back from that training in Dallas is really when it started to hit me was, all this process leads to in the recovering addict, a situation where you just go through life making good decisions. Just simple as that. And it's not, you don't have the nervousness of being caught. You don't have this activated thing or whatever, because you're aware of the world. You're aware of what's out there in the world, but you just make good decisions all the time. You don't go places. You communicate to your spouse when there's something that could be a little sketchy that might raise some doubt. So you communicate effectively and you just make good decisions. And in my mind, that's what I always wanted to be. I just wanted to be the guy that just made good decisions. And I remember thinking about it, and I think the reason that has resonated so well with me is because that was always why can't I make good decisions, right? And, because that's what I wanted to live into. That was the part of me that I wanted to be. And so, but you think about the work that goes into just getting to a point where you can just make good decisions. Because as an addict, you don't make good decisions.
Yeah.
Right. That's just, and whether, the brain and all these different things that are going on. But just knowing that I'm going to get up tomorrow morning and I'm going to make a good decision all the way from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to bed. I'm just going to make good decisions all day long. And it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Well, I think it's the difference between, we were talking about truth and light versus, evil and everything. I think it's also the difference between literally living a life in freedom versus fear. So when you live a life in freedom, like it's so liberating and light and aligned and authentic. And it's okay to be proactive about things because you never want to go back. But when you're living a life in fear, it's like a scarcity mindset.
Right.
It's like, well, there's not enough love in the world, or there's not enough acceptance for me, or, what, I'm going to be rejected. And I mean, all these are normal human things, right? But we have to catch ourselves on both sides of the aisle. Like if you're the betrayed partner or the betrayer, these types of beliefs, if you are like the emotion of fear is a very shrinking emotion. You're going to have tightness in your body. You're going to have rigidity in your thinking. You're going to have rigidity in your emotional capacity, in your communication. It's going to, the same type of physiological, mental, and emotional stuff is all going to mirror each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're living your life from a state of fear, you're not living it to the full capacity that you can. And freedom is right there. It is totally available. If you are the person that has acted out and you don't want to do that, again, whether you're an addict or whether you did it one time, doesn't matter. The same emotions play into it, the same thought processes. There's some pattern in there that can be healed.
Yeah.
And so that's why I recommend the path for everybody,
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, if you zoom out far enough, it's literally the healing path, the self-growth path that we all should be on. And it's the same type of path, just a slightly different topic that betrayed partners go on. We look internally and we go, what is it that I believe about myself? What are the negative thought patterns? What are the beliefs that I have that make me scared to set a boundary? What are the beliefs that I have that make me scared to use my voice? What are the beliefs I have that make me scared to look under the carpet and actually pull the thread and ask the questions to find the truth?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so when we're willing to do that, at the other side of that is the freedom. It is the liberation. It is the foundation of your relationship that's like the marble foundation instead of the sand foundation,
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, okay, maybe not every single thing that gets built on top of that is perfect, but it's going to be a lot stronger, 100%. And you can actually enjoy your life then. Yeah, it's just very different. So when you're thinking about the process, again, CSAT, disclosure, polygraph, impact, empathy letter, and when I look at all of the people that I talk to and all of the places people get stuck and everything, it's like, oh, my husband's really in denial. Cool. He needs to see a CSAT. They're going to help him with that. I just have so many questions that are unanswered. Great. Go through disclosure. You're going to be able to ask every single question. Man, I really struggle trusting my husband. That's why there's a polygraph, so that we can get the truth and you can get, I'm always going to come back to saying for the betrayed partner, trust your gut. If you feel like there's more, there's more. Don't override that. Don't doubt yourself. Don't let him or you gaslight you into going, well, he said it's fine.
Yeah. Right.
Well, he said it's the only time.
Well, and at this point, we all have a right to know. We all have a right to know what's going on in our marriage. Every single one of us.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you find a detail that surprises you about anything, I mean, you think about like finances or anything like that, you have a right to know.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I've had guys walk up to me and go, man, you're so brave doing that polygraph, and say, I could never do that. And I'm always like, well, why not? Why couldn't you?
Mm-hmm.
If isn't, what is it that you want to be? Do you, what if you were, the man you want to be is the man that goes and does polygraphs and goes and does hard things and sits there and gets yelled at, over something you've done. You know what I mean? That's what good men do.
Good humans. I think some of the best things, most of the best things in life come with difficulty, come with pain, come with doing, this is a super, super silly example, but let's just drive it home. We shared that I went out for an audition recently. I was terrified. I have not auditioned or performed in like 6 years. I've sung in church a couple times, but that's literally it. And throughout that period, I had gotten really nervous about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I literally felt like I had so much panic during the audition. And then my kidneys hurt. Literally, they hurt so bad. I think my adrenals dumped all the stress into my kidneys at once. And then they were like, I gotta flush this out. And it took them 40 minutes. Anyway, it was stressful. Okay. It was very, very stressful. And it's like, why would you do something that scary? I realize that for most people, this is a stupid example, but it's the example that I have right now. Why would you do something voluntarily to put your body in a state of that much stress. You know why? Because the reward was either one, I did the hard thing. And what I was telling myself was, that's enough. But you know what the actual reward was? I got the damn part.
There you go. Yeah.
And that I'm pretty excited about. And that is like a huge reward for, again, it's similar patterns, everything that we do, right? It's hard. I put myself out there and then somebody goes, hey, we like you. Mm-hmm. Hey, we accept you. Right. Hey, let me love you. I mean, again, it's a silly example for a lot of people, but for me, it's a huge freaking deal that this happened. And now I'm like so excited, and it's like, as soon as I did it, okay, I can do it. Mm-hmm. And then as soon as I got the part, I before I knew I got the part, it's like, okay, I can audition again. Mm-hmm. I did it once, I can do it again. Then when I got the part, it's like, oh, all these doors are opening. I can audition for this. Maybe I can do this. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking forward to rehearsals, right? And so doing the hard thing opens the doors for the life that you want when it leads you towards the vision that you have. Yeah. And so I think that's going to be really, really important. Like you were saying, like, who do you want to be? Mm-hmm. Yeah. On both sides of the aisle. It's a great question to ask. Who do I want to be? And how do I want to show up every day? Because some of the best results to that question, the best answers to that question are going to be it's going to be a hard path, but it's going to lead to a very rewarding ending. Yeah. Oh, it's a tough topic, but it's important. We love you. We care about you. Our hearts break when we see just unnecessary levels of pain when there could be healing when it's chosen. And so we just want to guide you clearly to that path. So in the show notes today, I'm going to share the list of resources that I give anybody that reaches out and asks me for resources. There's a short list for the addict. There's a short list for the betrayed partner. So if you're new on the journey, or if you've been on this journey for 2 years and you resonated with what I said, and you were like, oh my gosh, we just still feel stuck and we never did these things that you were talking about, go to that list and get that process started. It might be such a chill process for you because you're just ironing out some wrinkles at this point if you've gotten most of the work done. But I still think it's valuable because what you're going to do is, again, with the wound analogy, you're going to make sure all those little pebbles are out. You're going to empty that shoe. You're going to dump it out. You're going to clean out the wound. You're going to suture it this time instead of just the Band-Aid, right? Like you're getting the infection out, and that's always worth it, whether it's small or large, so that you know what you're dealing with and you can have the information to live a healthy, happy life. And I don't want you just zombieing through life, walking through it with a rock in your shoe the rest of your life. I want you to be happy. I want you to be free. I want you to be healthy. So we're going to put those in the show notes, and we hope that's helpful. We would love to hear from you. So please reach out if you have any questions or any other topics that you'd love to hear. And we hope you have a great day, and we'll see you next week. Woohoo! If you're listening to this, it means you've made it through an entire episode. Part of recovery is spending time engaging in healing and self-growth activities. We are thankful that you chose our podcast to be one of those activities today. Make sure you reward yourself for that accomplishment. If you've enjoyed this episode or this podcast, we would love to hear from you. Please take just a few moments to leave a rating and review, letting us know your experience with RecoverU. We not only love hearing how these episodes are helpful, but ratings and reviews help others just like you who are searching for recovery information and support find the podcast too. We can't wait to hear from you. See you next week.